Hey guys, in this video I will break down this Crysis demo scene which I created using Unity, and we'll also learn how to use terrain system in Unity's HD render pipeline. So let's get started. Alright, this is an actual reference scene from Crysis remastered version. I chose this scene because it was very simple to make. It only made of 3 simple assets: palm trees, grass and rock objects, along with some high resolution beach texture which I could easily find on Unity Asset Store on internet. So let's quickly jump to Unity and see how I set up this scene. Alright, here I'm inside Unity, and if I play this game, and as you can see it is running around 30 FPS, but you may find it a bit slower, and that is first, I'm running this inside Unity editor, and second, I'm also recording at the same time. And also note that all the settings and post effect are cranked to higher to get the maximum quality out of this scene. But I assure you, if you apply proper optimization and other settings, you can definitely run this game at 60+ FPS. Now let's take a look at each and every aspect of this scene. Start with Unity terrain system. Here is an actual terrain that I use for this level. There are 2 ways to use terrain system in Unity's HD render pipeline. Number 1, if you have already implemented the HD render pipeline, then you can just create your terrain and it will automatically assign this default HD material in your terrain system and you are good to go. The second method, if you are upgrading your project from other render pipelines such as built-in or URP, if I show you, then you need to create this new material, and in the shader option, choose HDRP and this terrain lid and assign this material to your terrain like this, and you are good to go. To create this level design and these pathways, I use reference from actual Crysis game. If I go to Photoshop, and here you can see this is an original map from Crysis game, and by the help of this map I created this splat map that allowed me to create a similar level for my Unity terrain. It also helped me to quickly paint my texture and scatter my grass and trees. By the way, if you want to know more about how to use these splat maps to create any kind of level in Unity, I have a complete tutorial about that. You can watch that from my Patreon page. Link is given in the description. If you don't want to use this technique, you can always create a new terrain and then go to paint texture section, choose your texture, and you can manually paint your terrain. Just like this. By the way, don't judge my painting skills, I'm doing it very roughly, but definitely after some practice you can create similar level design for your terrain as well. Okay, still not looking great, but you get the idea. By the way, if you're wondering how I created these layers and use them to paint texture on my terrain, then I highly recommend you to watch my previous video about terrain. I have explained this process in more detail, and the same process applied to the HDRP as well. However, there is one trick I would like to share with you that I use in this terrain. So for example, let's say you want to create this kind of ridges. To create these ridges, you can obviously use raise or lower terrain option, but using this option it is very difficult to match the height. So then easy way to do that is you go to set height option, then press Ctrl and click on area for the reference of the height like this, and now you can paint anywhere and this will automatically match the height of this area to this area. This option is really very helpful to quickly create this kind of ridges in your game. Here I want to mention one more thing. A lot of people complained me that the A, S and D option doesn't work for them, which are used to control the brush's size, rotation and strength. To be honest, I have no idea why these options are not working for you. For me, I just go to Windows, Package Manager and simply install this terrain tools, and these options work right away. If these options are not working for you, check in the console if there is any error or try restarting your Unity. Now let's take a look at the assets that I use for this scene. So basically most of the assets that I used in this scene are from Unity's Book of the Dead demo project, such as this rock and this cliff. These are directly imported from Unity's Book of the Dead demo project. You can download this asset from Unity Asset Store. A link is given in the description. And this is how the scene will look like if you try to import in Unity 2019.4. And that is because this scene is mainly suitable for 2018.2 or 3. But don't worry, we only need the asset. So basically all you need is just copy this art folder into your Unity project folder, and you will get all the assets that are used in this demo. These assets are really very high quality because they are made using photogrammetry, which is a technique that to use to create realistic asset from real world environment. The other rock model that I used in this project are also available for free on Unity Asset Store. After adding all the objects, I place them manually according to the reference. As you can see, it's very simple. And I also changed materials of some of the object. For example, this rock model. Originally, this was using a different material, but I used this rock 5.3 material from this HQ rock pack to get a similar tone across all the rock models. These rock debris are also from Unity's Book of the Dead demo project, and I applied a material using for other rock prefab, and then I pushed this asset slightly inside the terrain to create a feeling of rock debris. This truck model is downloaded from sketchfab.com. When you download this truck, this will not come with this material. You need to create this material in Unity and assign the proper texture. And also this mask map, you will need to create them separately. If you want to know how to create this mask map, please watch my previous video about PBR materials. For the water, I downloaded this water material from internet. And here are the settings that I'm using for this material. It's not very impressive, but it does the job. For the vegetation, all assets other than these palm trees are from Unity's Book of the Dead demo project. For the palm tree, I'm using this coconut palm tree package, which you can download from Unity Asset Store. For the palm trees, I have created this 4 LED prefab, which is simple to make. Basically, I just use one of this palm tree prefab that comes with this package, like this. Then create an empty game object and make this palm tree child of this game object. Then in the parent object, assign an LOD group, and then assign this palm tree to the LOD 0 group and delete other LOD groups. Just like this. And here you can see my prefab here. Basically, this is not a proper solution. It's just a trick that I used in this project. And why did I use that? If I go to my terrain and select my tree prefab, and here you can see that in order to use this random tree rotation option, you have to assign an LOD group. And that's why I did this trick. Otherwise, if you are working on a production environment, that you should properly assign a low polygon LOD to your tree prefab. For the material of this palm tree, I basically converted the default material into HDLite material, which is very easy. Just assign your normal and base color into proper slot. And for the material type, I'm using translucent instead of standard. You can see the difference. And that is why, because if I move my camera here, you can see a translucent effect into the leaf. If I change material to standard, you can see this is how it's looking with the standard, and this is with translucent. With translucency, it's looking much more realistic. And also keep in mind, if you're using this option, you have to assign this foliage profile in your diffusion profile, which is by default created whenever you implemented HDRP pipeline. Here is the grass that came with this Book of the Dead demo project. Keep in mind that you may also need to assign a diffusion profile for your grass and other foliage prefab. I basically duplicated the default foliage profile and created a new for grass. You can also use the default profile as well. And if you don't use this profile, then your grass may look like this, which is not looking correct. So make sure to check this diffusion profile is assigned whenever you import this because of that demo asset in your scene. The material for these rocks were automatically converted when I upgraded my project to HDRP, or you can do that manually by going Windows, Render Pipeline, and choose Upgrade Project Materials to High Definition Materials. Now let's take a look at the terrain settings. So I select my terrain, go to settings, and these are the settings that I use for this terrain. Keep in mind that some of these settings are a bit exaggerated. For example, these texture resolution that are definitely a bit higher for such a small area. If you're working on an actual game, then you may want to use a lower resolution for this kind of small size area. I use this resolution just for a demonstration purpose. For the terrain materials, if I select the terrain and go to paint texture section, and these are the textures that I'm using for this terrain. Basically, I'm using this beach and this grass texture for most of the areas. Let me quickly disable the vegetation. Okay, for this beach texture, you can download that from texture.com. This one. And I also created a mask map for this beach texture. Again, I have already prepared a tutorial about how to create this mask map. The process is same for this terrain texture as well. I use this beach texture in conjunction with this other beach texture. So basically, what's the difference between these two texture? If I select this texture, so it is basically the same beach texture that I'm using for this one, except for the norm map. I'm using a different norm map for the second beach texture so that I can get a nice variation between the texture. You can see here. This is the first beach texture and this is the second beach texture. It also prevents some repetition in texture. For the other textures such as this ground texture, I downloaded this ground texture pack from Unity Asset Store. Again, this is available for free on Unity Asset Store. This has some nice ground texture if you're working on terrain. One thing you will also notice that I'm using two types of grass texture on this terrain, and that is because later I will use this grass layer as a mask to scatter my grass mesh on it. And since I don't want to scatter any grass on this area, that's why I use a different texture for it. If you are feeling a bit confused, then don't worry, I will explain this process in a minute. For this tire marks, I'm using decals, as you can see. Decals are very useful to quickly add details in your scene. So if I select the detail, so this is the texture I'm using for this decal. Again, if you want to know more about decals, I have a complete dedicated tutorial about that you can watch from my Patreon page. I basically duplicated this decal texture to create this tire marks. To scatter the trees and grass on this terrain, I'm using this tree tool, which is developed by this guy. And he has a complete tutorial how to use this tree tool. I highly recommend you to check out this tool. Let me give you a quick demo of it. So suppose that this is our terrain. I have quickly prepared this terrain here. And let's say we want to scatter our grass only on this area. So first of all, go to your terrain and in the tree section, keep in mind that in HDRP, this paint detail section will not work because this is not supported in HDRP pipeline. So if you want to add grass on your terrain in HDRP, you have to use your grass as a tree prefab. So that's why I'm using here. If I click on this edit one, this is the grass that I'm using for this terrain. I have three prefabs here, this palm trees, this grass and this bush. So let me remove this one. Let's again attach the script. Click on this one and click on initialize. Like I said before, now you can use your texture as a mask to scatter your grass. So I want to use this texture to scatter my grass. Then I simply go to my tree section. Here you can choose your tree index, which is basically the number. This one is 0, this one is 1, and this one is 2. So let's say we want to add some palm trees. So I keep the index to 0 and just simply click on spawn. And then here you go. But as you can see right now, it's scattered everywhere. So I undo this one and click on this use texture, and then again click on spawn. And now you can see that the trees are only spawned on this area, which is quite handy. The only drawback of this script that it only allows you to undo once. So I increase the intensity like this, and voila. Okay. Obviously you want to use a different prefab to scatter on this area, not just a single prefab. To scatter the grass, I choose index 1 because this is my grass prefab, which is 0 and again 1, and then simply click on spawn. And it is very low density, so again undo this one. As you can see, it's only give you one undo ability, so I increase the density and click on spawn again, bit higher. There we go. And you notice that the grass is scattered only on this area, and that is because I use a different texture for this area. You can use a higher density. If I click on undo and 35 and spawn. Okay, now we have a denser grass. Now to add this fun prefab, simply change the index to 2 and obviously reduce the density to maybe 10, and again click on spawn. Okay, now we have some fun prefab here. And obviously at any point you can select your grass and manually scatter on this terrain, just like this one. Okay, or you can also scatter trees if you want. It also have a bunch of other parameters such as this Perlin noise and slope and other options. Feel free to check out this video for more information. Aside from this, I also have this upper bushes, which I again manually scatter on this terrain. It is basically same from Unity's book of the dead demo. I just increased its size to cover larger area. And also I have a outer terrain as well to cover the surrounding part of this scene, which is basically a simple terrain with a simple texture on it. The lighting for this scene is completely dynamic. Basically I'm using this simple sky and fog volume, which you can create by right click, go to volume and create a sky and fog volume. And in the sky type, I'm using an HDRI sky, which I downloaded from HDRI Heaven website. For the sun, I'm using a default direction light, and here are all the settings of the sunlight. And if I go to my lighting setting, you can see that I'm not using any kind of baked lighting. Everything is real time. Now let's take a look at the post-process effects. So for the post-process, I'm using a global volume, which you can again create by right click, go to volume and choose this global volume. And here are the settings. For the exposure, I'm using an automatic exposure control. In the tone mapping, as always, I'm using ACS tone mapping, which greatly improves contrast in your scene. And for the contact shadows in grass and other objects, I'm using ambient occlusion. You can see a huge difference with or without ambient occlusion. To adjust the toning, I'm using a white balance. You can see the effect. And I'm also using an indirect lighting controller because by default the indirect lighting was a bit dull. So I'm using an indirect light controller and set the indirect intensity to 2 to only affect the indirect lighting in my scene. And here is a bloom setting and contact shadows. Contact shadows are very useful. If I zoom in here, You can see contact shadows are very useful to achieve these small shadows. In the shadows, I'm using a large distance of 1000 meters, which is again not very optimized. It is just for demonstration purpose. If I reduce the distance to 10, you can see that most of the objects are not casting any shadows. They will only cast shadows when camera goes nearby them. Keep in mind that increasing this maximum distance will highly affect your game performance. And here's the color adjustment, some lift gamma gain, and some shadow midtone highlights. These micro shadows are very useful to get more contact shadows. For example, if I zoom in on this beach texture, and if I enable or disable these micro shadows, you can see it's giving more detail to this sand texture. And you can control this opacity from this slider. And finally, some vignette to darken the corner of the frame. And finally, to navigate around the scene, I'm using this first person AIO controller, which you can also download from Unity Assets Store. I think I have covered pretty much everything about this scene. If you want more advanced tutorial in Unity, then please give a visit to my Patreon page. Link is given in the description. And for any kind of queries, you can always ask me in the comment section or join my Discord server. And finally, I would once again like to thank all of my Patreon supporters, especially Hannah Sinkonan, Dimidu, Andy Law, Brendan Manion, Chill Carrier, Fahar Nugroho, Phoebe Liu, Heath Close, Honin, Honera Nuvo, JV, John Marks, Kleber Andrade, Silas Renagal, Stephen Christie, Stephen Shidero, and Underwater Sun. So that's it for this video. See you in the next one. Bye bye.